Welcome back to the program. So we'll move away from security now with hopes that that will be resolved in a more enduring manner to the issue of accountability. In 2024, the RMEFC is quoted to have said through its spokesperson that the high cost of governance in Nigeria is caused by the expensive nature of the presidential system of government, large bureaucracy, duplication of government ministries, departments and agencies, and endemic corruption. So which MDAs can be collapsed and merged? You can also ask about the expressed commitment of this administration at the onset to implement the Steve Orosai report. But let's have this conversation this morning, and we have joining us Mr. Vayala Kwaga. He's the Group Head, Research and Policy, Open Government and Institutional Partnerships. Mr. Kwaga, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and you know, rightfully we'll start with the renovation of the now named Bola Tinubu International Conference Center, which is set to have cost 37 billion naira. And the Minister of the FCT, you know, has reacted to criticisms about that huge cost, to say that a lot of people do not have taste, and he is there to please the FCT residents and not needless critics. But take a look at this. You know, a follow-up to that by a newspaper. 39 billion naira ICC costs can build 312 health centers, 1,200 classrooms. And there's a breakdown that we do not have time to go through about, you know, how that cost can be distributed, and the comparative, you know, analysis of what was allocated to other critical institutions. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Kwaga?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think it's interesting that we start with the FCT. So if you've listened to comments made by the FCT minister in the recent past, he has argued for more investments in the FCT. He has argued or made the case that the FCT needs a lot of funding, it needs a lot of finance, a lot of resources, because it has a lot it wants to do. So when you see projects like this taking center stage, you ask yourself whether there's a match between the actual desires and what seems to be done by the government. So, you know, I asked a question on social media the other day, yesterday actually, and I said, is it possible to find the budget of the FCT or the budget implementation reports of the FCT? You know, the budget to see how much was proposed to be spent, that is publicly accessible, and that people can actually scrutinize and use such information to ask questions, and the budget implementation reports to really see how well money is being spent. Mind you, the FCT has the National Assembly as its legislative body. And unfortunately, we're only able to find the 2022 budget and not one single budget implementation report. I think I can say less about audit reports. And that's really where the problem, I think, for Nigeria lies. The most recent audit report for the federal government came out, I think, late last year, and it was for the 2021 fiscal year. So who are we going to hold responsible for the way money was spent, you know, in the previous administration? And this is regular practice. Even if you look at federal government spending, the latest report available is for Q2 2024. So we do not know how well money has been spent for Q3 2024, Q4 2024, Q1 2025, and I guess Q2 2025. So going back to the spending by the FCT minister, one has to ask this question. What type of conversations are being had around the plight of persons that live within the FCT? Should this have been prioritized compared to health, compared to education, compared to water and sanitation, compared to local infrastructure, compared to supporting local economies? Because government is meant to provide security and ensure productivity and the enhancement of livelihoods. How well does this answer those questions? And is there evidence that this was subject to a rigorous debate, or was it just imposed on the FCT?
You know, I like the way you landed with that question. So let's even probe further. I have done my bit of sending a message to one of the handlers of the FCT's ministers, the work he does. I think it's very clear that he's a very passionate person. He likes to do infrastructure. That, I think, having seen him as governor now, as FCT minister, his strength is clearly infrastructure. Because you can see the roads, you can see all of that. But the question has to be asked as to the amounts being spent on this project. When you look at 39 billion, I'm not saying million, 39 billion naira spent to renovate. From what I read, I heard he said the president has taste, and I think people had called their attention to the fact that the center was built to 250 million naira as at when it was built many, many years ago. So it raised the question of differentials in terms of exchange rate today, and also the taste for class, or all of that by the administration. Is that a justification and a right response to critical questions as to bring the paper, let's see how you spend 39 billion naira to renovate, not build? Isn't that a valid question?
I mean, it absolutely is a valid question. And unfortunately, we live in a country where public officials feel insulted and offended when they are asked how public money is being spent. I frankly think it's absurd, to say the least, because not only does the theory of social contract envision that leadership is done with the consent of the governed, and I mean that includes an understanding that leadership and authority is granted, it is given in trust, but the very Constitution that I suspect is still our law speaks very clearly about providing transparency and provides mechanisms for accountability. So it is always bewildering, you know, when you get this type of feedback or response from government officials and government agencies, because we have a particular social psychological view about authority and leadership in Nigeria that presupposes that they are set apart from people, a higher class of individuals that really do not owe any form of accountability to Nigerians. And I think that's antithetical to democracy, it's antithetical to modern governance, and there really is no way you can create the groundwork for an accountable government where you have responses such as this. There should be information, public financial information, available for the taking. You should not have to go to an office to get a hard copy. It should be available publicly so that citizens can engage with their representatives in the various legislatures, you know, in the various parts of the country, and ask these questions and get some form of information and, you know, be taken through the thought process as to how this was arrived at. If we were to ask, you know, 100 or 1,000 FCT residents if fixing the International Conference Center was in their top 5 priority, I suspect it may not be. So if the citizens are not being brought into the conversation, really, for whose benefit are these decisions being made?
And so I wonder the kind of orientation that is that the planners of the budget have, because every year we talk about this. If you look at the budget of the presidency, you see the high costs, you know, allocated to training, ICT, official vehicles, and in fact, some allocated to, you know, the renovation, not building, of the office of the vice president. The residence of the vice president this year is about 21 billion naira. And so the question is, what kind of orientation should the planners of the budget have, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, or what directives do they have as far as the preparation of these budgets is concerned?
So, I mean, this is a great question, and we are dovetailing into one of my favorite topics, which is national planning. So in an ideal situation, there should be a lot of pressure being mounted by the National Assembly. The legislature is meant to be the representative of the people, direct democracy, if you will, and this is meant to engage an executive a National Planning Commission, the Budget Office of the Federation, the Ministry of Budget and Planning, the Accountant General's Office of the Federation, the Ministry of Finance should have a lot of data, trend analysis, longitudinal analysis, quantitative, qualitative data, and information on where exactly the country wants to go. So this information should be premised on a short-term plan. As we speak, the medium-term plan. As we speak, the medium-term plan instituted by the Buhari administration would expire this year. I'm not aware of plans by the government to institute a new medium-term plan, which I think is extremely important. So when you have government exists through the instrumentation of public administration. That's the routine work that government does day to day. This should involve planning, research, and statistics. Every government MDA, every government department has a planning, research, and statistics department. Now, these PRS departments are meant to provide information and data in their various areas of domain, whether that be health, whether that be environment, whether that be security, whether that be water, whether that be agriculture. All of this information should percolate up to the decision makers, the Ministries of Budget and National Planning, the National Planning Commission, and the Budget Office of the Federation. And they are meant to ask themselves, what is the trajectory of the Nigerian state as regards certain indicators, maternal mortality, out-of-school children, productivity of agricultural land, etc. And the application of money through the budget is meant to address those concerns. So they say neonatal mortality is X% this year. By Q4 2025 or 2026, we want it down by Y%. There are supposed to be indicators, targets that should be met. And again, the pressure should come from the National Assembly because they are the oversight body. They are the constitutionally mandated body to provide oversight and scrutiny on the implementation of the budget. The National Assembly is the only institution that has the power to summon anyone in the Federation, and the Constitution says anyone. So with this enormous power, one would expect, rigorous debates, rigorous presentations, calls by the National Assembly to scrutinize the work and the implementation of the executive. But by and large, you do not really get that as much. In their defense, they have complained, the National Assembly has complained several times that their summons have not been obeyed. Requests by them to the various MDA heads have not been taken very seriously. And I think that that really speaks to a broader problem around our governance system and really a problem of the separation of powers, if you think about it very, very concretely. Because the various arms are meant to serve as a check and a balance, over the other to ensure that power is not concentrated in one particular institution. But over the years, we've seen sort of a shift or a drift, towards the legislature sort of playing an executive function and the executive not having the political will, not demonstrating the amount of restraint needed for a 21st century democracy, to be withheld by the rule of law. So there are a number of issues to discuss, but there really is no evidence that there is any serious rigor, data, and analysis being put into government decision-making in Nigeria.
The Constitution is very clear. I like to say, I tell people my favorite provision in the Constitution is Section 14. I always cite it. Section 14(2)(a) talks about the sovereignty belonging to the people. I do remember when that 1.7 trillion naira budget was presented of the FCT, which is the second largest budget. We have 5 big ones. Lagos 3.2 or 3.3, FCT 1.7 trillion. We have Niger 1.5, Rivers 1.4, I think Ogun slightly over 1 trillion naira. Senator Ashiru had raised the question that there's no breakdown of the revenue sources when it was presented to them. I don't know whether that was later presented, not to even talk of expenditure. I'm saying that to say that I want you to speak to the issue of subnationals and inability for proper accountability in that sense, because we know that some of these things go into kickbacks, inflated costs over invoicing. Our budget is about 36, the federal government's budget. In fact, the entire budget of the Federation is about $55 billion. let's talk about the federal government, state and federal, 55 billion. But federal government alone is about $36 billion. And about a quarter of that, which is almost $10 billion, will go for the deficit. And some of these deficits are caused by these things we're talking about, inflated costing, over-invoicing, requests for kickbacks. So let's bring it down to, it looks like it's only the federal government that really has a bit of framework we can look at, always challenge. That's why we have data to challenge the federal government most times. But if you go to these subnationals, some of this legislature in the subnational, they are literally appendages of the governor. How do we insist that sovereignty belongs to the people? Let subnationals begin to publish. There are a few states that do it. The accounting system, so that we can probe further and know what monies are being used for, because it's almost arguable that the biggest set of corruption sometimes happens at the subnational level.
Thank you so much for that question, Jeffrey. Fortunately, our organization, is working on a project we call the Separation of Powers Project and Strengthening Legislative Autonomy. It's really interesting you asked that question. The problem, as you have identified, again, is a problem of the separation of powers. The system upon which Nigeria is based is one that understands that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when you have a system of subnational government, which, by the way, we practice a federation, so we ordinarily should have a weak center and very strong federating units, because federations tend to exist in pluralistic countries where there are large, many ethnic groups, many religions, and people don't want a strong president that they cannot agree on. They want weak centers and, strong federating units. So the challenge that is observed is that there is no real financial or fiscal autonomy that state legislatures have. And to a very large extent, this even extends to the judiciary. I mean, you see pictures in the media and in the news of the governor gifting vehicles to judges, or, buying houses in the case of the FCT for judges. And it's very, very interesting and actually quite terrifying, because it shows that there really is no autonomy for these arms of government. And you wonder if they are able to serve as a significant check and balance over the other. And, the answer to that question obviously would be a no. So the pressure that is meant to be exerted on the executive from the legislature that represents the people, that contains or has taken up the sovereignty of the people, is simply not there. So in addition to state legislatures not really having the capacity to engage with the technical aspects of planning, with the technical aspects of public financial management, debt, budget, audit, and accounting, there really is no rigorous engagement with the implementation of the budgets at the state level. Ordinarily, we are meant to see quarterly reviews, for instance, at the state levels in the various states, where you have the Speaker of the House calling on state MDAs and making them provide an account on how money has been spent, how targets have been hit, how well the budget has been implemented. Unfortunately, the only thing you really do see is when the state governor comes to present the budget, he takes a bow and he goes. There really is no rigorous debate on the contents of the budget regarding the state medium-term expenditure framework and state medium-term planning. So there really is no rigorous, analytical, evidence-based debate that goes on in the various state houses of assembly. This could also be as a result of weak legislation. I know that the previous Senate and House wanted to pass a bill for the financial autonomy of state houses of assembly. I'm not sure that bill actually saw the light of day, because some states, stood against it, I guess for obvious reasons. So until there can be some significant legal pronouncement on the financial autonomy of state houses of legislature, state house of assembly, I beg your pardon, and the state judiciaries, we really will not likely see the development and the political evolution that we hope could bring about some economic development in Nigeria.
All right. Let's just remind the FCT minister that according to the Weekend Post, the 39 billion naira cost of renovation of the ICC is more than the budget of 12 federal universities. We must thank you very much. An anchor at this point, we've been talking to Mr. Vayala Kwaga, Group Head, Research and Policy, Open Government and Institutional Partnerships. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And there's more to come. This time, we're headed to that critical conversation on the outcome of the President's Democracy Day address to the National Assembly, during which he announced national honors to the heroes of Nigeria's democratic struggle, some of them being late Chief Ken Saro-Wiwa, playwright, renowned playwright of his time, and 8 others from Ogoni. We'll be having the spokesperson of the Ken Saro-Wiwa Foundation come through to articulate the family's official position to this national honor. Stay with us. We'll be right back for this conversation.